When I stepped onto that ranch, time simply stopped. Since then, all I know is that I've been trapped in a never-ending nightmare. Before starting the report, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Write in the comments what time this video arrived for you. Now, enjoy your favorite horror session. I don't usually write this kind of thing. I don't believe in ghost stories or curses or those backroad legends people love to scare each other with. But ever since I left, or think I left, that ranch, I've started forgetting simple things. My full name, today's date, my mother's face. So I'm writing this while I still remember, hoping someone reads it and doesn't make the same mistake I did. It all started with a flyer. It was an old yellowing sheet of paper pinned to a crooked tack on the student board at the university, tucked between ads for tutoring and county fairs. Looking for a recently graduated veterinarian for temporary work at a dairy ranch. Room and board included. At the bottom, a landline number with an area code from a town I'd never heard of. I was broke. No internship, no job, sharing a cramped room with 2 roommates who snored in stereo. That offer felt like a gift. I called. A soft-spoken woman answered, gave me the address and said, "You can come. We need the help." The next Saturday, I took a bus to the rural interior of the state, somewhere out in western Pennsylvania, and then an old taxi to the ranch entrance. The driver stopped on a gravel road and pointed with his chin. "It's down that way. From here on, you're walking. I'm not going in." "Why not?" He looked straight ahead, then averted his eyes. "Road's bad. Trust me. Good luck." I shrugged and started walking. The gate was old, dark wood with the name Hope Hill Ranch carved in faded letters. Beyond it, green fields stretched into the distance, cows grazing as if frozen in time. And on top of the hill, a big white house with a wooden porch and powder blue shutters. Pretty, too peaceful. I was greeted by an elderly couple. The man was Mr. Harris and his wife, Mrs. June. They were kind, spoke softly, and always seemed too calm. They gave me a room upstairs, warm food, and a list with the names of the ranch animals. That night was eerily silent. No crickets, no frogs. The countryside, usually buzzing at night, felt dead. Before bed, I checked the hallway clock. It said 3:17. Weird because it was still early. I figured it was broken until I noticed my watch also said 3:17. And my phone, no signal. Same time. Coincidence, I thought. I was tired, but the next morning, same thing. All clocks stuck. "Mr. Harris, sir, do you know the clocks in the house have all stopped?" He laughed but didn't answer, just shook his head and kept picking tomatoes. The tomatoes, by the way, were too red, like they'd been perfectly ripe for days, without rotting. Later, during the animal rounds, I noticed something else odd. A pregnant mare named Lucy. She looked ready to give birth any second. When I asked how long she'd been like that, Mrs. June answered, 5 years. 5? That's not possible. She's always like this. Almost, but never. She said it like it was normal, like the animals on the ranch never changed. Never got worse, never got better. Meals were always the same. Rice, beans, slow-cooked beef, fresh vegetables. Always too fresh. And the food, it didn't cool or get cold. It stayed the same, even half an hour later. On my second night, I woke to a soft sound. 3 gentle knocks at the door. Knock, knock, knock. I thought it was wind, but then heard a whisper, very close. "Don't write anything down. They'll find out." I jumped up and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The clock still read 3:17. I decided to investigate on my own. Started walking the ranch at different hours, trying to leave down the road. But somehow, every time, I ended up right back at the house, unintentionally, like the road bent back into itself, like a circle. On the 3rd day, I entered the barn. It smelled like rust and mold. And there, between the loose boards in the back wall, I found something. An old black spiral notebook, yellowed with age. Hidden. I flipped through it. Veterinary notes, reports, animal names, strange behaviors, all without dates. On the inside cover, one sentence in bold, jagged letters. If you're reading this, it's already too late. The last pages were smudged, scratched out, but one chilled my blood. It was a profile with my full name, in my handwriting, signed, dated May 19th, 2004. But I was born in 1999. How could I have written that at 5 years old? I shut the notebook, looked around. Morning light seeped through the barn's cracks, but pale, washed out, like a morning played too many times. That evening I sat on the porch. The sky was still, no clouds, no wind. The trees didn't sway. And then I noticed not a single leaf had fallen since I'd arrived. I was trapped in a place where time didn't pass. Or worse, where time had already passed too far and now refused to move. What if I'd already been there before? What if the only thing that ever changed was who forgot first? That night, the whispers came back, this time from inside the room. I froze, swore I felt the bed behind me breathing, the mattress sinking slowly, as if something invisible was rising from it, inch by inch. And worse, it wasn't just a sound, it was a presence. Like I was being watched from every corner at once, by eyes without bodies, by echoes of people who were still there, or never left. I spun around and turned on my phone flashlight. Nothing. The room looked the same, but on the wall beside the bed, where there used to be faded paint, there was now a dark handprint, as if made from soot or dried blood. A hand exactly my size. I bolted, ran down the stairs, nearly tripping, and rushed onto the porch. The sky was frozen, like always. But this time, I saw something new. A tall figure in a hat standing still at the edge of the cornfield. Not Mr. Harris. Taller, thinner, and even from 300 feet away, I could feel it. He knew I was watching. I ran back into the house and into the living room. The old tube TV, which had never worked, was now on, but it showed only one image, a static camera view of the front porch, the same spot where I had just been. And there I was, frozen, not moving, like a still photo pretending to be video. Except for one thing, the figure in the hat, getting closer. I unplugged the TV, sparks flying from the socket, and stumbled into the kitchen. Mrs. June was slicing vegetables like nothing had happened. "Are you seeing all of this?" She kept slicing, smiling kindly. "Sometimes it takes a while for outsiders to accept it. You'll understand. Again." "Again," she paused, smile still on her face. "We always try to warn you, but curiosity wins. You always come back. How many times have I been here?" She looked over her shoulder as if seeking permission, then said, "A few, but this might be the last." I rushed back to the barn. I had to see the notebook again. Flipping through, I found something new. A page that hadn't been there before. A newspaper clipping, taped in. It told of a veterinarian who vanished in 2019, last seen entering Hope Hill Ranch. Name, mine. Photo, mine. A photo I didn't remember ever taking. The article ended. Local authorities believe he never left the area, but no concrete leads were found. I dropped the notebook. The floor felt like it shifted. The air thickened. The sunlight dimmed. Or maybe there had never been sunlight at all. That's when I saw it. In the back of the barn, a metal door. Rusty, wrapped in heavy chains. It must have been there all along, but only now did I truly see it. I approached, touched the handle. It was warm, almost alive. I opened it. What I saw inside I can't describe. A hallway that made no sense. Walls pulsing like living flesh. And everywhere, clocks, hundreds of clocks. All frozen at 3:17. Digital, wall-mounted, pocket, cuckoo. One, the largest, had mirrors instead of numbers. And in each mirror, a different reflection of me. Age 8, 17, 23. One near the end, old, hollow-eyed, mouthing words without sound. "You have to choose now. Forget or remember forever." The air pulled at me. Time twisted around me. When I looked back, there was no door, only darkness. And then I understood. I wasn't called to that ranch. I'd always been there. Each time I arrived was just another turn in the cycle. A new body, a new memory, trying to escape something that has no exit, because time doesn't move there. It spins like a carousel of horror. Still on the outside, but turning inside. The ranch isn't a place. It's a living loop of memory, a prison of time. And the worst part, each time someone enters, someone else has to stay. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw a young man, college t-shirt, backpack slung over one shoulder, looking around confused, exactly like I had when I arrived. He looked at me. "Hey, is this Hope Hill Ranch? I came because of the flyer." My heart stopped. He didn't know yet, but now I did. It was my turn to warn him. Or maybe I already had and just forgot. If you found this account, you're probably scared and wondering if it's true, if this ranch really exists. Maybe you're trying to remember something that slipped away. A scent, a stopped clock, a dirt road where time feels heavy. So take my advice. If you ever see a flyer asking for help at a ranch called Hope Hill, burn it. Don't call, don't go. Time doesn't move inside, but you do, and that's exactly what it wants. Undated, unsigned note, found inside a yellowed spiral notebook. The final page is blank except for one note in red ink, 317. Are you enjoying the video? Leave your comment. Your support is very important to the channel. Now let's move on to the next report. I should have never crossed the gate of that ranch. That sentence echoes in my mind like a late warning, a desperate whisper I only truly understood once everything around me began to unravel. The ranch was an inheritance I barely wanted to receive. A distant uncle who vanished years ago left me that forgotten piece of land in the middle of nowhere. When I learned about the will, I almost laughed. I couldn't understand why he'd chosen me, a city guy, to take over that isolated place, surrounded by stories my family always avoided discussing. Since I was a kid growing up in Savannah, Georgia, I used to hear my grandmother talk about old rural customs, about secrets that hide in the long, silent nights of the countryside. She used to say some lands have memories, not just of those who lived on them, but of something much older, something that refuses to leave. My father, always the practical one, said it was just superstition, legends to scare children. But my grandmother, with her deep-set eyes and hushed voice, insisted that my uncle's ranch was one of those places where time didn't flow the way it should. I never believed her. Until now. I arrived one autumn afternoon. The sky was gray and the ranch looked like it was asleep. Dry leaves scattered across the ground, the wind whispering through the trees. The house, an old wooden structure, had its windows shut tight and the front door creaked as I pushed it open. That's when I noticed the clock in the living room, one of those large wooden wall clocks, and it was stopped, frozen at exactly 3:33. It struck me as odd, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe the power was out, or someone had turned it off before leaving. I settled in with nothing more than a backpack and a flashlight, ready to spend the night. I just wanted to rest and figure out what to do with that inheritance, which felt more like a burden than a gift. But at dawn, everything looked exactly the same. The same light through the window, the same stopped clock, the same suffocating silence pressing down on my chest. I stepped outside, trying to see if anything had changed. The fence, the road, even the wind, nothing. The same leaves on the ground, the same sense that time had frozen in a repeated instant. That's when I realized the day was repeating. I was living the exact same day, over and over again. On the second loop, something strange happened. I started to have visions, brief, fragmented images of people I didn't recognize, wearing old-fashioned clothes, speaking languages I didn't know, but that felt hauntingly familiar. I remembered my grandmother's stories, her warnings about the ranch that traps those who walk on it, and about an ancient evil she said lived there, feeding off the stagnation of time. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard voices. Not in my head, real ones. Whispers coming from the walls, the floor, the darkness that seemed to breathe. I have no idea how long it's been since this started. Every night brings me back to the same point, as if I'm trapped in an endless loop. I try to leave, but the road always brings me back to the same door, the same clock, the same frozen moment. Today, as I write this, one question eats at me. Why me? Why that ranch, that clock, that vanished uncle? And who are those figures that appear to me? Fragments of a story that's not just mine. If tomorrow comes, I swear I'll try to learn more. But something tells me the answer is buried out there, somewhere between the shadows of the past and the silence of the present. And to escape, I'll have to face not just the ranch, but everything it hides, including what I once was, long before I was born. I woke up with the sense that something had changed, even though the clock in the living room still marked 3:33, unmoving, like a silent guardian of that suspended time. The air inside the house was heavier, and the shadows seemed to stretch with a will of their own, as if they were breathing with me. I knew I couldn't run from the truth anymore. The ranch wasn't just a place where time stopped, but where it tangled into itself, wrapping everything in an invisible prison. Since childhood, I'd learned that my grandmother's stories had deep roots, not just old wives' tales, but fragments of ancient knowledge. She said that land was too old, that the soil itself held memories, and that certain forces fed off those who stayed too long. She spoke of a silent, invisible evil, and said my uncle's ranch was both a prison for it and a trap for anyone foolish enough to challenge it. Now, with the weight of those memories flooding my mind, I began to understand the visions that came with each repetition. They weren't just random glimpses of past lives. They were pieces of my soul shattered across endless cycles, reliving the same fate over and over on that cursed land. I had lived there before, more times than I could count, always returning to the same moment, caught in a web beyond my own existence. It was during one of these repetitions that, for the first time, I saw beyond the walls of the house. In the old barn, hidden beneath loose floorboards, I found a dusty journal that had belonged to my uncle. Its pages were yellowed, the handwriting shaky and full of fear. He wrote about his own battle with the ranch, how time didn't flow properly there, how the days repeated, and how he felt his mind fracturing between each loop and the whispers of the trapped souls. He spoke of an ancient entity, one that fed on repetition, stagnation, on hope dying a little more with each repeated dawn. But the most disturbing part was at the end. He wrote that the ranch didn't just trap the body, it held the soul, and that the entity needed someone to carry on the cycle, someone to inherit the burden, someone like me. He knew he would disappear, become lost in that suspended time, but hoped that maybe I could understand, and maybe one day break free. I returned to the house with a heavy heart. The voices were clearer now, almost forming words. They were calling to me, begging me not to give up, to remember who I was before the cycle began. That's when the memories came crashing back. I remembered my grandfather, the man who taught me to respect the land and fear its unseen forces. He used to say that some places were more than dirt and trees. They were gateways to other times, where past and present merged, and some souls got stuck, doomed to relive their last moments over and over again. He always spoke about the importance of resistance, of never giving in, because the only hope was to break the cycle. At that moment, I understood. The ranch wasn't just a prison, it was a test, a challenge issued by the forces dwelling there. I had to remember. I had to gather the pieces of who I'd been across lifetimes to understand what was feeding and what could be destroyed. I spent nights trying to decipher the visions. I saw faces, voices, moments when I tried to escape, when I cried alone in the dark, when I stared at the stopped clock and screamed for time to move. But nothing happened. I saw a boy running through the field, a woman crying on the porch, a man surrendering to despair. All of them were me in different forms, trapped in the same cycle. Eventually, by accepting I wasn't just a victim, but a part of the curse, I began to act differently. When night came and the day threatened to repeat, I didn't hide in the bedroom. I didn't wait for the clock to freeze the house. I walked into the fields all the way to the edge of the ranch where the trees formed a nearly impenetrable wall. There I found what my grandmother had always spoken of, a weathered stone carved with ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with their own light. I knew in that moment that this was the heart of the cycle, the point where time was swallowed and recycled. With my uncle's journal in hand, I recited the words he'd left behind. an old invocation, a plea to break the chains holding our souls. The air changed, the wind howled, the shadows wrapped around me, trying to pull me back into the loop. But I didn't let them. The stone glowed brightly, and a silent roar echoed through the ranch as if time itself was cracking open. The next day I awoke to the sound of the clock, ticking, finally counting the hours as it should. The sun shone differently, and though the ranch was still old, it felt like it was breathing again. There were no more loops, no more whispers. I had broken the cycle, but the question still echoes in my mind, the same one I asked at the beginning. How long will this peace last? And who will be the next person to cross the gate, unaware they're stepping into a trap that might never release them? Because deep down, I know the ancient evil never truly disappears. It just waits. And the ranch is still there, ready to feed on its next prisoner. Before we move on to the next story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It's a pleasure to have you here. Now enjoy the moment listening to the next story. Time froze for me in that moment, and I've never been able to shake it from my mind. Ever since I was a kid, I grew up listening to the stories my grandfather told about our family's ranch in rural Montana, a place that felt like it existed outside of time, surrounded by legends that blended simple country faith with an almost sacred fear. He used to say that out there, across those lands, time wasn't a straight line, but a circle that opened and closed according to a force no one dared challenge. My childhood was filled with simple lessons, but always tinged with a restless curiosity. My mom would often say that nature had its secrets, and it was better to respect them than to try and understand too much. My grandfather, a quiet man, would only mention old things that watched over the ranch, things that didn't like to be disturbed. As a kid, I thought all of it was exaggerated, stories meant to keep us grandkids away from certain parts of the property. But I was wrong, and I would only realize that once my profession brought me back to those lands. Working as a paranormal investigator, I'd already witnessed things most people wouldn't believe. But nothing prepared me for the call I received that cold autumn morning. Local reports claiming that time simply stopped in certain areas of the ranch. They said watches froze, leaves hung motionless in midair, and even the wind seemed to hesitate, as if the world itself choked for a few seconds or minutes without explanation. I arrived with the right team, all experienced in phenomena that defy logic, and we quickly encountered something far beyond our understanding. The moment we stepped onto the ranch, a strange sensation overtook me, a heaviness in the air that felt like it was bending time around us. And then it happened. In an instant, the world around us came to a halt. Everything stood still, frozen in a heavy silence. The air, once filled with birdsong and breeze, became thick, as if we were trapped inside a living photograph. That's when I noticed a detail that sent a chill down my spine. In the center of that stillness, a small glimmer shimmered, as if an invisible gaze were fixed on us. Something ancient, something that didn't belong to our world, yet was here, controlling every frozen second. We tried to move, to speak, to feel, but every attempt was futile. And worse, when time resumed its flow, every frozen second vanished forever, as if the ranch itself was tearing fragments out of reality, destroying them. The mystery only deepened, and with it, the certainty that this place guarded a terrible secret, one protected by an ancient entity as old as the land itself, holding absolute control over time. Now sitting around a makeshift campfire during what seemed to be a rare moment of normal time, I looked at my team's weary faces and knew we wouldn't come out the same. And maybe, just maybe, escaping this place was already impossible. In the silence of the night, I heard a whisper coming from the fields. A voice so old, so full of warning, that I still can't decipher it. Time doesn't just stop here. It traps. The whisper never stopped. That night, as the fire crackled, we all heard it. A low, dragging sound that seemed to rise from deep within the earth. It sounded like a forgotten language, a prayer, or maybe a curse. One of the guys tried recording it, but all the device caught was static. When I asked if he understood any of it, he shook his head, visibly shaken. That was when the first things began to disappear. A watch stopped working. Then one of my colleagues' boots vanished mysteriously from the room where we were sleeping. At first, we thought it was a prank or some kind of sabotage, but no one admitted to touching anything. Stranger still, when we searched, it was like the item had never existed at all. That's when I understood. The frozen time wasn't just a suspended moment in the air. Each second time stopped here was a piece of reality being destroyed, erased from existence, as if the ranch were alive, not only guarding its secret but rewriting history. A history determined to erase any trace of our presence. I woke up in the middle of the night with a crushing weight on my chest. I got up, and when I looked out the window, I saw the entire ranch submerged in absolute stillness. Not a single leaf moved, no insects buzzed, and out there, in the open field, a figure emerged, tall, indistinct, gliding across the still air. It wasn't human. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body froze, as if I too had become part of the suspended time outside. I could only move again when the watch on my wrist, previously frozen, began ticking once more. It was as if the entity allowed me to breathe just to remind me who was in control. In the following days, the team began to fall apart. Some disappeared without a trace. Others were driven mad by the feeling of being watched constantly. I too began having visions. Flashes of the ranch's past, images of men and women bearing something deep in the soil, whispering words the wind carried like sorrow. The secret this entity was guarding wasn't just some ancient mystery. It was an ancestral curse. We discovered that the ranch had been the site of a horrific sacrifice, a desperate act to contain a dark force that once threatened to consume everything around it. To keep it sealed, time had been distorted there, frozen at key points to protect a tomb. Not of a person, but of a presence that should never awaken. The entity controlling time here isn't a benevolent guardian. It's a living prison, a trap that sustains itself by capturing the souls of those who dare come close. In our final attempt to escape, the ranch showed its true face. Every path we tried led us back to the same spot, an endless loop. Time, once our ally, had become a merciless jailer. And when I looked into a window, I saw my own reflection. Not from the present, but from an earlier moment, eternally frozen. That's when I understood. The ranch doesn't just freeze time, it imprisons the soul with it. Every second that stops is a piece of life torn away, a fragment of existence that will never return. Today, as I write this, maybe to be found someday, maybe just to leave a warning, I can feel time folding in around me. I know I'll soon become one of the lost fragments of this ranch, trapped forever in a moment that never ends. The last thing I heard was the whisper, repeating something my grandfather once said with fear and reverence. Time doesn't pass here, it dies, and now I die with it. Let's move on to the next report. But first, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. If I could go back in time, I would never have pressed the shutter on that camera at that farm. My name is Lucas, and I'm a professional photographer. My job has always been to capture what people don't see, what time tries to hide. So when I was offered a different kind of project, photographing an isolated farm deep in rural Vermont that had been virtually abandoned for decades, I thought it would be an interesting challenge, a chance to bring forgotten stories back to life through images. My family has always had a strong connection to the land. I grew up listening to the advice of my grandfather, a simple and wise man who used to say, "The land remembers," and "Where time stands still, the past breathes with the present." To me, it always sounded poetic, a metaphor for the bond between who we were and who we are. I never imagined I'd one day understand that saying so literally. I arrived at the farm in the late afternoon, just as the golden light of the sun began to fade behind the old trees. The main house was in ruins, with broken windows and a gate that creaked in the wind. There was a heavy silence, the kind even birdsong can't break. I started photographing what remained, the peeling walls, the porch overtaken by weeds, the old tools left behind in the barn. The shots came out crisp, and when I looked at them on the camera screen, I felt a chill. Some images showed details I hadn't seen with my own eyes. People in old-fashioned clothes, scenes from a time long gone. It was as if my camera was revealing a past still trapped there, invisible to anyone just walking through the ruins. That night, while reviewing the photos in the makeshift guest room I was staying in, one detail unsettled me. A photo showed a man standing at the edge of the well, staring intently into it. A man I hadn't seen while shooting. I searched online for the farm's name and found an old story. They say a farmhand vanished there nearly a century ago after falling into the well. His body was never recovered. That man in the photo, he looked just like the one in the story. Why had the camera captured someone who wasn't there? And stranger still, why when I looked out the window that night, did I feel someone watching me from the dark? I barely slept, disturbed by what I had seen. The next morning, I decided to explore more of the property, hoping to find clues about the disappearance. That's when I found an old journal, hidden in a compartment of a worn-out desk. The yellowed pages spoke of a buried secret, a feud between families, and a tragic event no one dared speak of. My grandfather's words about time and memory started to take on a disturbing new meaning. As I read, I realized something on that farm made the past echo into the present, and I was becoming part of that memory. But what could have caused this fracture in time? And how could I escape a place where yesterday refuses to stay in the past? Still without answers, I began to notice that each photo revealed more than just images. They were windows into a time trying to rewrite itself, as if the farm were trapped in an invisible web, and I had unknowingly stepped into it. I couldn't get the farm out of my head. That place, with all its desolation, was far from forgotten, at least not by something or someone that seemed to exist between the fragments of time trapped there. The feeling of being watched kept growing, and with every step I took, the line between past and present blurred further. The next day, I returned to the main house with my camera, but this time I brought the journal with me. It felt like those pages were guiding me through a script no one had dared follow. As I moved through the ruined rooms, I read aloud the entries from the farm's last resident, a woman named Helen, who wrote of fear and guilt that suffocated her family. She described a tragedy that had marked the farm decades ago, a conflict between brothers over control of the property, ending in a fatal accident, the man in the well. Helen suspected it wasn't an accident, and that the secret hadn't died with time, but lingered, carrying an unresolved pain. As I read, the air around me grew cold. I snapped photos of the room's contents, an old clock, a rocking chair, a black and white portrait of the family. When I checked the images, they showed more than objects. They were faint figures, shadows overlapping with the memories of that house. I had to understand what was happening. I went to investigate the well. Its entrance was covered with an old wooden plank, but I managed to pull it off. Shining my flashlight inside, I froze. Old objects stuck in the mud, a torn piece of cloth, and a rusted chain. It felt like the well held more than just a body. It held fragments of a story that refused to fade. At that moment, I heard a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, only felt the chill that made me stumble back. I covered the well again and ran, my heart racing. That night in my room, I looked at the photos on my computer again, and then something terrifying became clear. The images didn't just capture the past, they depicted specific scenes, key moments from the day of the tragedy. I saw the man from the well arguing with his brother. I saw Helen crying in her bedroom. I saw the moment the man vanished. It was as if the farm were replaying that fateful day, trapped in an invisible loop. I realized I was seeing echoes of broken time, scenes caught in an endless moment, and I was inside that repetition. In the days that followed, I noticed the echoes weren't just in the photos. Sometimes I heard footsteps in the barn, distant voices, doors creaking open by themselves. I saw shadows moving across the halls and felt a coldness in spots where the tragedy had unfolded. My grip on reality began to falter. I felt that if I didn't uncover what had started this cycle, I might be trapped here too, forever walking between two timelines. So I decided to face the truth. I returned to the journal and read Helen's final entry, which revealed a shocking detail. The brothers' fight wasn't just about land, but about a far darker secret. A pact made to cover up an old crime, a pact that, once broken, would unleash a curse, trapping the farm in eternal repetition, a temporal prison. I understood then. The man's disappearance at the well had triggered everything. I had to undo that knot in time. The next morning, camera in hand, I went back to the well. I took detailed photos of the area, and as I shot, I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned and saw, reflected in the water surface, the image of the man from the well. His eyes were locked on mine, empty yet filled with sorrow. He looked like he was pleading for help. With a chill down my spine, I realized this was the key to breaking the cycle, discovering the truth of what had happened and setting right the injustice that sealed the curse. I went to the small chapel at the edge of the farm, where I found an old altar with worn-out symbols. In the journal, Helen had mentioned a ceremony she once tried to perform to calm the spirits, but it had been interrupted by the tragedy. I gathered my courage and tried to finish the ceremony, speaking aloud words I'd learned from my grandfather, old, nearly forgotten words of forgiveness and release. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room, the shadows vanished, and a heavy silence fell over the farm. Back at the main house, I checked the photos again. This time they were clear, no shadows, no echoes. It was as if the past had finally been laid to rest. I left the farm with a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I'll never know if what I experienced was real or just a reflection of my own mind, trapped between what was and what might have been. But one thing I do know, the memory of the land is more alive than we think, and some stories should never be awakened. Some stories never have clear answers, and that's perhaps what scares us the most. To hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and get ready for the next story.